So today I want us to build a patch from scratch together using the new Cosmos module from Black Noise Modular, which is of course also available as a hardware module. We can use Cosmos in all sorts of ways, from processing modulation, processing audio, processing sequencers, and much more. We'll take this of course slowly, one step at a time. As always, I have here the clock from Impromptu, I have here the MindMeld mixer with the sand reverb, and I will also use color coding, so I have here the cable color key from Inclan. And let's start with creating rhythms. So Cosmos is a great module for generating all sorts of happy accidents. So let's try generating something interesting. Another module from Black Noise is the slew LFO module that will look like this. It's basically a function generator that we can use also as an LFO. You can see by default the mode is set to LFO, and Cosmos has basically only two signal inputs, right? So we will send the LFO to the left one, to one of them, and I want this LFO to interact with my clock. So I will use a multiplication of 4, let's say, with a BPM of 110. And now connect this, of course, the clock to the second input. You can see we have only two inputs, right? And now both signals will interact with one another in various ways. So for example, let's use kickall as our voice, right? This we can send already to the mixer. We need to trigger kickall in one way for it to make sound. And we have now multiple logic outputs in the upper section of Cosmos. So for example, we have here the AND gate output. If we use this, right, this is the result we are getting. Again, the LFO is interacting with the multiplied by 4 clock. Right, also a nice thing about having this module in VCV, you can see we have the tooltips and you can see exactly what output is what. We have AND, we have OR, and so on and so forth. Now, the LFO and the clock again will interact now via AND logic, and we can, for example, change the pulse width of the clock to get different results. Again, we have AND logic, and if I take the pulse width down, right, we get an interesting rhythm. We can also change the rate of the LFO to change the rhythm even more. This we do with the rise and fall. Right, so let's take, for example, the rise all the way down, and maybe the fall all the way up. We can also change this here, the rate from slow to fast. And we get this interesting rhythm. Right, again, the LFO is interacting with the multiplied by 4 clock using AND logic. Now let's add some movement to this. I will use the holder 8 from Sequencel. These are basically 8 sample and hold sections. I will trigger the first 3 channels, 1, 2, and 3, with the same triggers. And we can modulate, for example, the decay, the shape, and also the velocity of kickall. Let's start with the velocity. Here I can offset this signal so it will start a bit higher, right, and then open it a bit, so now it will go up and down from this point. Right, so we have velocity, we can have also decay and shape. Right, so we have an interesting rhythm and some movement with the voice itself. Let's use another kickall. I will just duplicate this. And this will be the right channel here as a stereo voice. Right, so we have now a stereo voice. And on Cosmos, the lower section is basically exactly the same like the upper one, just inverted. Right, so instead of using AND gate like we are using here, we can use AND or NAND gates, right, which is basically the inverted. So this will trigger the second kickall, and we get now 2 different rhythms. right, as a stereo voice. Again, I will use 3 channels of this rhythm to modulate again decay, shape, and velocity, offset velocity. And let's open the modulation. So now we have a stereo voice with 2 kick-all modules. Right, let's add, for fun, some delay to this. I have here the Surge XT delay. I will hold Shift and click the cables just to disconnect them quickly. And now they will go, opalach, they will go to the delay. And from the delay, if I right click the outputs, I can send this directly to the mixer as a stereo sound, a stereo voice. And I would also like to sync this delay, maybe a bit less mix. Right, let's add also some send reverb and maybe take the level a bit up. I like doing this in the gain adjustment here, the gain input. Maybe something like 3 dB up. We can call this kick all and add some send reverb. And something like this. Let's also use another rhythm, another output from Cosmos to ping a filter. So we will use tangents from Volt. In this case, let's use, I will show you this also on the scope. We have here an analog output. We will see this also in a second. This is XOR through 0. If we use this, if I show you this on the scope, you can see basically we have dynamic triggers. Sometimes louder or more intensity, sometimes less, which is perfect for pinging. Right, so this will go to the bandpass input, no need for the scope. And the output will go to the mixer. Right, let's raise the resonance. Right, and let's go with, let's try and tune this a bit. Maybe like this, I don't know, I don't have perfect pitch, so forgive me if it's not completely tuned. Right, and now we have here 2 more sample and hold sections free, so let's use the clock multiplication. Right, we can modulate the resonance once. I will take it here all the way up, and then here I have an attenuator. Maybe a bit. Yes, this is better. Right, let's also add some delay to this with Prince of Perception. Again, I would like this to be synced with 8th dotted, of course. You can take here the lows a bit down, although there are not so many lows here. Right, and then use another sample and hold again with the clock multiplication to modulate the panning. Maybe take the level a bit down. Call this ping, and again add some opalach, send reverb. Right, so we have various rhythms already just by combining an LFO and a multiplied clock. Okay, let's mute the voices for a second and place them up here so we have more space for more voices. Let's use another Cosmos. And let's try and experiment a bit with processing audio by combining 2 waves and creating complex audio signals. So let's use 2 VCV VCOs. Let's go one left and one right. We will use once a triangle wave. This will be the left input, and the right input will be a sine wave. Let's again use a scope, and already I will connect the output of the scope to the mixer just so we can hear what we are seeing. Maybe also take the level just a bit down. And now again we have a few options. So all of the outputs with the letters, just like I showed you before the XOR through 0, all the outputs with the letters will be analog outputs. Analog in the sense that they will work with continuous signals, unlike the digital outputs that will work with binary signals like gates and triggers. So we can use various outputs for processing the two VCOs. For example, we have again the XOR through 0 that will look and will sound like this. Right, again we are combining both oscillators, so a good idea will be to detune one of them. Let's, for example, take the triangle wave a bit down. Right, maybe something like this. Already we can hear the processing. Another example can be, we have here the maximum output, right, again an analog OR output. Right, that will give us a different result. We can even create interesting feedback loops, and of course this will work a bit differently in VCV because it's digital than in hardware with the analog module. But also here this will create interesting results. There's another module from Black Noise Modular, it's called Goma or Goma 2, I guess. Right, the triangle wave will go to the first channel first, and now if I use the third channel here, we will eventually mix the first three channels, so the triangle wave you can bring again all the way up. Right, now we have the same result, but let's use now the XOR through 0 with the second channel here and start bringing it up. Adding again in a sort of a feedback loop another wave. Right, and again in the lower section here we have the inverted outputs, also the analog inverted outputs. So we can use the minimum inverted output with the third channel. Right, something like this. So we get a quite complex wave shape, complex audio source. Right, by the way, in the right-click menu of Cosmos, we have here clipping at -10. You can turn it off and then it will not clip. I will leave it on. So now let's work on the sound a bit. We will use the flag chorus, here the electric ensemble. This will go here to the input, no need for the scope anymore. We will use also the Surge XT filter, in this case with a low pass, right? So we have the chorus, and again, if I right click the filter, I can send this directly to the mixer. Right, maybe take the gain a bit down, and then here we can leave the level all the way up. Right, let's add some chorus. What I like to do is take the mix all the way up, then work on the sound, take the lows a bit out, add more drive, maybe a bit more spread, a bit movement here. Right, and then take the mix all the way down and start adding it until I like the sound. Right, something like this. Let's name this drone and add sand reverb, maybe lots of sand reverb actually. Something like this. Bring back the other voices and mix it in. Right, and let's use another LFO. I will use again the slew LFO here from Black Noise to modulate the frequency of the filter. Again, by default it's set to LFO. So I just send this to the filter and I map the cutoff. Right, and then again with the rise and fall, if we have longer rise and longer fall, we have a slower LFO. Something like this, maybe Obalach, maybe add some resonance. And again, just for fun, let's add a delay. So again, if I hold shift, I can just disconnect the cables, right click, send this to the delay, right click, send this to the mixer. Again, let's sync this. Right, maybe a bit more modulation, so there's even more movement. A bit slower LFO here. More resonance. Just fine-tuning things. Okay, let's move this also out of the way. Let's put this here, let's say. Right, and let's work on another voice. In this case, let's try producing audio, right, using Cosmos as a sort of an oscillator. So we'll use another Cosmos. For this, we will need again the slew LFO module. Right, in this case, we don't need it as an LFO, we need it as a slew. So on the mode, we change this to slew and also change the rate to fast. Just as a side note, Cosmos has a beautiful manual with all sorts of patch examples and ways of using it, so I highly recommend taking a look at it. Right, and now just like in the manual, this is a patch from the manual. We can use the XNOR gate output, right, which will be this one, XNOR gate output, to gate or to activate the slew limiter. And the result will go now to the right input. Right, I will already use also a filter. I will use the VCF from VCV just so things don't get too harsh. And also here we have various outputs we can use. So for example, if we use the XOR gate output, we will get this result. We will use a low pass filter. Right, it's oscillating, and the rate of the slew limiter will change the pitch. So let's take the rise all the way up and take the fall a bit down. Oh yeah. Right, and now we can even sequence this by sequencing the fall time. So for example, let's use a sequencer. We will use Entropia from the geodesics. Yes, this might look like a complex sequencer, but it really isn't. So let's first of all set a 5-step sequence. We have here the length. If I click it once, we have opalach. If I click it once, we have 7 steps. I got a new mouse and it's doing all sorts of things. Sorry for this. We have 7 steps. I click it again, we have 6. I click it again, we have 5 steps. Right, the output will go to the fall CV input on the slew limiter, and then let's go step by step. Right, and tune this sequence. We have here the magnetic clock. The first sequence we will tune is the inner circle here. Right, this will be the first step. Second. Third. Right, so we have 5 steps. But Entropia has actually 2 sequences. We have the blue sequence, which is the inner circle. Let me take this down for a second. And the yellow sequence, which is the outer circle. And we can, with probability, switch between them. So let's first of all go to the yellow sequence by turning this probability all the way to the right. And let's go to step number 3, let's say 1, 2, and 3, and set a higher note. Right, and step 5 as well. Right, maybe this. Now we can go back to the original sequence by turning this to the center. Right now this will be mostly the blue sequence. This is not so nice here. This will be a bit of a funny sequence, but now we have the 5 steps of the blue sequence. Right, and let's use the multiplied clock and also reset. Right, but we can have again steps 3 and 5, right, with some probability, with this probability per step. Right, so we have mostly the blue sequence. Of course, you can fine-tune this a bit if this is a bit too abstract for you. Right, but we have the stable 5 steps of the blue sequence and 2 steps with probability that will be a bit higher with the yellow sequence. Let's add some delay to this with Prince of Perception. Again, this will be synced with dotted eighth, a bit less lows. Let's add also send reverb, call this VCO. Right, something like this. Right, and maybe also some modulation for the filter and panning. So I will use the sample and hold from Bog Audio, which has actually 2 sections. Again, using the multiplied clock, 1 section will modulate the filter. And another one. This is actually quite nice. I like this. It's not completely tuned. It's a bit more abstract. And one for the other one for the panning. Right, so this can also be used as an oscillator. Again, from the manual, make sure to have a look or take a look at the manual for more ideas on how to use Cosmos, and let me know if you are interested in more videos about it and with it and using it in all sorts of different ways. There are many things to explore with it. Again, it's also available in hardware. I don't want to make this video too long, so that was it for today. Feel free to add more voices to this and share your results with us. Thank you for watching. Cheers.